As John mentioned, my name is Andrew Hyde, and I serve as the Ecumenical Campus Minister over at the University of Guelph. If you're familiar with the rhythms of campus life, you might know that we are just at the tail end of exams right now. There's a young woman in our group who is unfortunate enough to have the very last exam in the very last slot. And so that exam happens tomorrow. And so there will be many sighs of relief, I think, come tomorrow from over at the university. Exams are one way that people get evaluated and such at the university, but another way is through group work. And I don't know if you're a fan of group work or not, but I'm going to invite us to do a little bit of group work as we begin this morning, if that's okay. I'm going to invite you to turn to a neighbor, maybe someone you came with, but if you're bold enough, maybe turn around and introduce yourself to someone who might not be as familiar to you. And I want you to just chat and have a little conversation for about 2 minutes, if that's okay. And I'm going to invite you to chat about something from our story. It could be just as easily from campus life, or maybe from your work life, or maybe just from conversations that you have out and about on town. But the question is this: have you ever fallen asleep during a lecture? Or maybe at work, or maybe in a conversation, but heaven forbid during a sermon or anything like that. But have you ever fallen asleep, maybe somewhere where you were a little embarrassed by that? Or if this is a better question, what school subject or topic that comes up could just as easily put you to sleep these days? Okay? Maybe just turn and introduce yourself to a neighbor. I'll give you a couple seconds to have a quick conversation, okay? Okay, I'll give you another 30 seconds or so. 30 seconds to wrap it up. What's that?
You let the cannon
I know. That's the trouble with these informal churches. Okay, maybe finish your last sentence or so. Let's have a quick show of hands. How many people had a story that you could share with a friend? Did people have a story that they could share? Yeah, kind of, a little bit. I remember in high school, I went to Milton District High School, down in Milton and stuff, and I had one science teacher who would fall asleep in his own classes. And so that's who I think of when I think of our story today. Thanks for taking a moment to share. It is such a blessing and an honor to be with you here on this second Sunday of Easter. I don't know about you, but every once in a while I need a reminder that Easter is not just a day on the calendar, but an entire season of the church year, right? And in fact, an entire way of being in the world. We in the church hold tight to this claim of being an Easter people, not just one day a year, but every day of our new life in Christ. And so it's good during this season of Easter to really reflect on what we mean when we say that. What are we after, and what do we mean when we claim to be an Easter people? Which brings us to our story that we heard today. a story of resurrection from the book of Acts. The raising of the young man Eutychus. This is a short little story. Might not be all that familiar to some folks because it often gets skimmed over for other things. I like this story because, like the stories of Lazarus and Dorcas and Jairus' daughter and even Jesus himself, it involves someone being risen from the dead, with echoes of last week's Easter story. But furthermore, and John alluded to this a little bit, it is a story that I'm drawn to in particular because I find my calling being focused around ministry with young people. For in this story, I feel that we have a pretty accurate depiction of what it's like to be a teenager in the church today. And I think it has some pretty important lessons for us in the church about how we might minister to and serve with those young people. Beyond that, when we look at the list of biblical stories that involve someone being raised from the dead, over half of them involve the raising of young people, children or teenagers. And I wonder if there is something in the lives and experiences of young people that informs us about what it means to live the resurrection and to walk as Easter people in this world. Our story takes place in the days of the early church, in the Aegean port city of Troas, where Paul and his ministry partners have paused during one of their missionary journeys to spread the good news. Paul is scheduled to depart from Troas the next day, and so he stays up late with the community there, visiting and preaching and worshiping in an upper story room, making the most of the final few hours they have together. As the hours pass and the preaching drags on and on, like I'm sure you're unfamiliar with, we glance over to see the teenage boy Eutychus hovering at the edge of the community, sprawled out on the window ledge, catching a breath of fresh air or maybe even gazing out at the stars, likely wishing he was somewhere else. If he were a teenager today, I expect he'd be fiddling on his phone or texting with a friend. You've likely seen young people when they are made to be somewhere they'd rather not be. Right around midnight, Eutychus finally succumbs to his boredom. He drifts off to sleep, and he falls right out the window, 3 stories to the ground below. Everyone rushes down to where the body lay, but Eutychus is dead. Paul, however, clears a path through the people and stretches out over the teenager's body with an embrace that brings Eutychus back to life. They bring the boy back upstairs where the community celebrates communion, a meal that commemorates Jesus' resurrection and the promise of new life for all believers. And the preaching then continues until daybreak, when Paul and his companions leave the city. There are a number of important and I believe instructive things that happen in this story, and I want to lift up just a few of them for you today. First of all, the community notices when Eutychus goes missing. There is some observant soul who had the forethought to do a head count and the gumption to say, I think we're one short. Wasn't there a young fella sitting in the back row a few seconds ago? This community paid attention to the people who, for whatever reason, found themselves on the margins, who placed themselves at the edge of the community instead of in the heart of the action. And when that person fell away, the community noticed because they felt incomplete. They cared for the person who was no longer in their midst. How often in our churches today, when someone on the margins disappears, do we take notice or respond with indifference and assumptions? Oh, we must not have been a good fit for them, we say. Or little Johnny must have hockey practice on Sunday mornings now. Maybe he'll come back when he has kids of his own. The reality is, young people have drifted away from our churches, and we need to take notice instead of burying our heads in the sand. Only then can we proceed to ask ourselves, or better yet, ask the young people themselves, why this is happening. The second thing this community does is it stops everything it's doing to care for the needs of the young person. They are responsive. They take action. They have in their midst the great Apostle Paul, who is only there for a few more hours at best, yet even this takes a back seat when one of their own is in need. This is not business as usual. Reaching out to this young person is not an extra, some over and above measure that would be nice to help out with if there's extra room in the budget. Ministering to Eutychus is not a cherry on top endeavor, but an acute and imperative necessity that wipes everything else off the agenda. Eutychus becomes a priority for his community, and through their responsiveness and faith, the young man and the entire community is healed. In our faith communities, are we this responsive to the needs of our young people? Are we open to changing our patterns, to disrupting the status quo, to examining our priorities in an effort to bring them back into community and wholeness? Or are we tied to a particular script, maybe from our own experience, addressing our own wants and needs, that tells us what church should do and be and look like? If we want to connect with the Eutychuses in our midst, we need to be adaptive with our practices and responsive to others' needs. The third piece I want to lift out of this story has to do with what happens after Eutychus is restored to life. On the surface, it looks like everything goes back to normal. They go back upstairs, and Paul picks up where he left off, preaching until daybreak. Congratulations, Eutychus. You thought part 1 was rough. Wait till you hear part 2. But then I got thinking about our young man Eutychus, and I wonder how he would have heard Paul's preaching this second time around, with new ears after having just been raised from the dead. What must it be like to hear someone like Paul preach about new life and resurrection in Christ when just a few short moments ago you were among the dead yourself? There is a remarkable shift that takes place when something we experience as just talk becomes action and touches the core of our lived experience. A light goes on. A penny drops. New life is breathed into a topic which before may have felt stale, remote, and abstract. Maybe you've experienced this kind of awakening yourself. For me, it came after a particularly life-changing experience at a leadership development camp when I was a teenager. I came back to my home congregation, and the sermons, the liturgy, the things my church did, which before seemed foreign and boring, suddenly seemed full of meaning and purpose and inspiration. Because the things that those practices pointed to had touched my life and my experience in a significant way. I wonder if the same might be true for Eutychus in our story today, just as it was for Paul himself and his own experience of the risen Christ. And I wonder if the same might be true for the young people in our midst as well. We hear with new ears and see with new eyes. Our lives are changed when our talk becomes action and the love and power of the risen Christ touches our lived experience. Being resurrection people means that we have been raised by Christ in order to raise others as well. To paraphrase what Paul writes in Galatians, I have been crucified with Christ, but I am alive. For Christ was raised, and now he lives in me. The risen Christ dwells in us, bringing through us new life to the people around us, and hope to those who exist on the margins. Like Eutychus, there are young people who have fallen out of the windows of our church communities. And in these last couple minutes I have this morning, I want to suggest 3 ways by which we might respond to their needs and open ourselves to God's healing and new life. The first way is around Earth Day, which we celebrated around the world yesterday. You may have seen the March for Science in different parts of the world, by which people sought to protect the voices of people doing climate research in these troubled times. I know our kids planted trees last week as part of their Earth Day celebrations at school. Did you mark the occasion in any way? The reality is that the policies and practices we put in place now to protect the environment and make life sustainable on our planet will affect young people and future generations more than they will you and I. And so one way we can minister to the young people in our midst is to take seriously God's call to environmental stewardship and advocacy. The second is around camping ministry. Besides being Earth Sunday on our church calendar, this Sunday after Easter is often celebrated as Camping Sunday in the United Church as well. United Church camps have had a profound impact on my life and the lives of many others in ministry today. And the camps in this conference in particular are, I believe, the secret gem of the United Church. Silver Lake, Ryerson, and Cave Springs do amazing work caring for the young children and giving them adventures and opportunities to reflect on spirituality and social justice. Programs like the Leadership Development Camp that touched my life in significant ways give young leaders opportunity to serve and develop their sense of a vocational calling. I would not be in ministry today if it were not for that camp run through Hamilton Conference. The reality is, though, that all of these camps are struggling with numbers and funding. There used to be 4 camps in our conference when I was growing up, but now there are only 3. And so one of the ways that we can minister to the young people in our midst is by supporting the important and life-changing work of our United Church summer camps. And third, I'd be remiss if I didn't say a word about campus ministry at places like the University of Guelph. Campus ministry is often an area of work that feels marginal or on the outer edges of our church life. But it is really at the front lines of the realities many young adults face as they wrestle with things like mental health, their sense of purpose and calling, their identity and their place in this ever-changing world. The ecumenical campus ministry represents the Anglican, Presbyterian, and the United Church at the University of Guelph, and it is the only faith group out of 20 faith groups on our campus. It is the only one that explicitly affirms the LGBTQ community. And so you can see what a vital role we play on this campus. We offer small groups, community dinners, pastoral care, and leadership opportunities to a campus community that numbers more than 27,000 students. Campus ministry is really one of the only ways our church reaches out to young adults in meaningful ways. And the reality there is that we are becoming an endangered species as well. Denominational funding for our campus ministry is about half of what it was not even 10 years ago. And unless more churches and individual partners join up with us, our future on our campus is in jeopardy, maybe even as early as the end of 2018. Which is why we are so pleased and encouraged by the support that Trinity United Church has given to our ministry over this past year. The gift of funding from this congregation, through your budget and events like the coffee house just a few weeks ago and today's lunch after church, is a real encouragement to our ministry. It does more than simply help us with the financial challenges we face. It indicates the value that this congregation places on the lived experience of young people as they face what are some pretty substantial challenges. And so on behalf of ECM, the Ecumenical Campus Ministry, I have this lovely little certificate to leave with you today, indicating our thanks for the partnership of Trinity United Church. I'm going to leave it with John and Galen for you guys to display here somewhere. Supporting campus ministry is one of the important ways that your congregation ministers to the young people in your midst. There's always more that can be done. If you would like some more information about the Ecumenical Campus Ministry, about what we do and how you might get involved or partner with us, I would love to have a conversation with you after service. I'd love to add you to our email list, or we can chat over coffee sometime. I'm pretty available to have these conversations. We're also currently seeking some new board members as well. So if God is nudging you to give in that way and be part of our leadership team, we'd love to make room for that as well. So finally, however we live out our calling to be Easter people in this world, my prayer is that we may do so in ways that include young people and that reach out to those precious children of God who hover around the margins of our communities. There may be a Eutychus in our midst right now who needs and deserves the encouragement and support of our church community. So thank you, and God bless. Amen.